Hello, my name is Michael Shaw, I'm the Minister of Devonport Community Baptist Church, and we're going to look at Romans 12, 1-2, probably a passage that's incredibly familiar, but I want to look at it in a very different way. And I look at it in three different ways, three different versions, NIV, NLT, and the Message version, which of course is a paraphrase. And I'm going to consider it in three different ways, and each different passage, version, brings a different maybe emphasis, and hopefully draw out some different themes. So it's kind of like a Lectio Divina, but done in a slightly more sort of constructed way. So I'm going to read it in NIV first. Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve God's will, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. When you think of God, when you imagine God, is mercy a high trait on your list? For many people, God can be just too big to comprehend, too distant, and often we lose the sense of God's mercy in the fog of God also being our judge. Ezekiel 33:11, I'm going to do a couple of Old Testament passages, says this: As surely as I live, says the sovereign Lord, I take no pleasure in the death of wicked people. I only want them to turn from their wicked ways so they can live. Turn from your wickedness, O my people Israel. Why should you die? Psalm 145, 8-9 says this: The Lord is merciful and compassionate, slow to anger and filled with unfailing love. The Lord is good to everyone. He shows compassion on all his creation. Psalm 35 says this: For his anger lasts only a moment, but his favour lasts a lifetime. Weeping may last through the night, but joy comes in the morning. And these are just some of the Old Testament verses that speak of God's anger and his judgment being overcome by his mercy and his compassion. Richard Rohr writes, why has so much of Christian history settled for a courtroom instead of a bridal chamber, for a threatening torture chamber instead of a joyful invitation? It's really quite disturbing how this has corrupted the whole gospel. So pause for a moment. Where have you experienced the compassion of God in your life? Let's look again at the passage, but this time in the NLT. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you, give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, a kind he finds acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Don't copy the behaviour and the customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good, pleasing, and perfect. When we think of worship, do we also think of sacrifice? In the Jewish culture, which Jesus was born into, sacrifice was at the centre, the heart of their worship. And sadly, we have lost that concept of sacrifice. In their culture, all the food products were taken, and then the best of it, the firstborn, were given to God. But the food wasn't wasted. In fact, the animals, once cooked, were eaten and enjoyed by those who sacrificed them. The feasts, there's quite a lot of feasts in the Jewish tradition. They were sometimes the only big meat meal that many families would have had. I think if they wandered into our supermarkets today with our pre-killed, pre-packed food, I think they would have thought that we were the barbarians. We don't kill animals ourselves as part of worship. But what sacrifices are we prepared to make as our sign of worship to God? Are we too comfortable? Where do we offer God where we live, where we work, where we worship? The whole point of the animal sacrifice was they gave part of their work, part of their income, and also part of the food that was on their family's table. Take a moment to consider what a sacrifice of praise might look like for you this week. Brian Zand, an American pastor, wrote this: modern Westerners, being separated from the world of sacrifice by a millennia, have a hard time grasping the Hebrew idea of sacrifice as a gift that provides a covenant meal of reconciliation, and tend to drift towards the pagan idea of sacrifice where an angry God is appeased. We'll read the passage again. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, you're sleeping, you're eating, you're going to work, you're walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity. God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. When we are considering what it means to be counter-cultural, often we make the mistake of getting it mixed up with personal morality. Or worse still, we believe it's going back or maintaining traditional views of race, gender, and sexuality. When in fact, the church, being complicit in prevailing cultural ideas like consumerism, individualism, and violence, is actually conforming to the culture. What areas of our culture bother you? We are just living through the biggest cultural shift many of us have ever experienced. We've gone through a time unlike any other. What has lockdown taught you about your priorities? Many of us, myself included, clapped for carers every Thursday evening. How are we going to offer those people who early on this year were described as low-skilled workers when things go back to normal? Take a moment, pause to consider. What parts of our culture do you want to see returned? And what would you like gone forever? The message says, unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings out the best in you and develops well-formed maturity in you. I'm going to leave you with these two questions. Where are we dragged down by culture? And what do you think Christian maturity looks like? Thank you so much for listening, and and hopefully you'll join in with our normal sermons one other time on a Sunday. Thank you.